All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lori Gurman. I'm the state E-rate coordinator. And today we are going to be talking about the E-rate Form 470, specifically around Category 1. And this is also targeted for our libraries. All right. So as we go through, please don't hesitate if you have questions. Looking at the list of participants, we have some familiar names, but please let me know, if you do have any questions at all. Now, I did put in the chat the URL for the resource library page. So let me jump over there real quick here, maybe. All right. So if you go over to the resource page and scroll down a little bit, you're going to see today's presentation listed here. All right, the funding year 2026 Form 470 Cat 1 workshop for libraries, right? Just so you know where to find it. All right, now, remember that with the Form 470, this is the bidding form. All right, now the purpose of this is just that. It's to it's to bid. It's to ask for pricing. All right, now of all the E-rate forms, there's an E-rate form for everything. This is the only form where you may not have to file this on an annual basis. All right, it just depends on, are you currently in a multi-year contract? You may have a bidding exemption. All right. So again, you may not have to file this form. Go back and verify your existing contracts. When are they set to expire? All right. Because if you have a contract that's going to expire this coming June 30th for recurring service, like the bandwidth out to your branches, all right, if it's set to expire, as I said, this coming June 30th, then you would need to file a 470, right, to ask for pricing to renew that. Now, with Category 1, remember that this includes internet access and transport or bandwidth, all right, as well as hotspots for bookmobiles. This form acts as an RFP, a request for proposal. And once you submit this form, it starts the 28-day waiting period, all right? So it starts that competitive bidding process. So again, that's a hard and fast rule. If you file a 470, you cannot accept, a contract, choose a vendor until you've waited that minimum of 28 days. Another rule is if a service is not listed on a 470 and this is not one of those bidding exemptions, you cannot move forward to the next form in the process, the 471, all right, and get that funded. But like I said, go back, check those contracts. Do you need to file this 470 this year? Now, with E-rate, we have to apply every year. All right. But again, you may not have to file the 470. Just look to see where you're at in those contract terms. Or are you using a Cabio service? Remember, this is that commercially available broadband service, internet access service. All right. So if you are using a Cabio service, all right, you don't have to go out to bid. The FCC has already said these are cost effective. Everything else has to be bid on the 470. Now, just another reminder here, if you attended the beginners training, we talked about this, that at the October 30th FCC board meeting, that the FCC Commission overturned the previously approved hotspots for off-premise, so the hotspots for patrons, that was rescinded. Okay, so those are no longer eligible. And the reason I'm pointing this out again is the current version of the 470 has not been updated yet to remove that service from the form. All right, so you're still going to see it there. In fact, I've put a red line through it to help you remember, right, that this is not this is not going to be eligible. All right, but again, like I said, it's still showing up on the form. Now, the last bullet here, just a reminder, when we talk about those hotspots, these are the hotspots where patrons could check those out and take those home. All right, we're not referring to the hotspots that a lot of our libraries use for the bookmobile, or if you have a kiosk, all right, those remain eligible. And I'll show you how to file for those on the 470. Let me know if you have any questions there. Now, I do want to go ahead and just point out a couple of things here, because this was actually new starting last year, but it's still pretty new for us. All right, that after the 470 has been submitted, if you realize that you need to upload some RFP document for clarification. All right, we do have the ability after you file the 470, and I'll show you here after we go through the form where to find this. All right, but you do have the ability to upload additional documentation. All right, just know, I'm going to caution you here that if the new RFP, if it changes the service, right, whatever you originally put on that form, like if you realize I didn't put enough bandwidth, right, because again, the one we're talking about today is all around category 1. All right, if you realize I didn't ask for enough bandwidth, or I put in the wrong quantity, I put in 2 circuits and I really need 3. All right, just know that if it changes the service at all, it will restart your 28-day waiting period. The portal will actually ask you, will this, additional information, is it changing the service, yes or no? And when you indicate yes, all right, it's going to restart the clock for that 28-day waiting period. Now, another piece of functionality that's been added, we now have the ability to cancel a 470. All right. You can also go back and view canceled forms. So if you submitted a 470, maybe for bandwidth, and then you realize I still have more time on this existing contract. I don't want vendors contacting me, asking questions or sending me quotes. All right. If you realize that you filed the 470 in error, you can go in and you can delete it. All right. So again, we have that functionality available. Just checking for questions or comments. All right. So let's just jump in. All right, so to start the 470, all right, obviously you have to have a portal account, you have to log into Epic, all right, but then from the landing page, there's a couple of different ways to start the application. The easiest is using the shortcuts here in the upper right-hand corner of the landing page. You'll see FCC Form 470, right? So we just click there, and then we start the application. Now, every form that you file in, the E-rate portal, it asks for a nickname. So this is user defined. Make it something that you're going to recognize. All right. If this is only going to have category 1 and you think you might apply for cat 2, all right, indicate that in the nickname. It also helps vendors be able to see that, okay, this really is a category 1 application. All right. But again, it also makes it easier for you to go back and look up the previously filed forms if you do have multiple for a single funding year, all right, to be able to distinguish one from another. All right, so here I just said FY funding year 2026 ABC library, and this is my cat 1. All right, and I can click on continue, save and continue. Now, the 470 actually pulls information from the Epic portal. So the first thing it's going to look at is how many entities do you have? All right. So, main library, do you have branches listed in Epic? Do you have a bookmobile? All right. And it's going to indicate that total number of entities. Now, if you see that that number is incorrect, right, there's nothing we can do here on the form to change that. You would have to reach out to USAC if you realize that one of your buildings is missing. All right, so again, this is just looking at Epic and just pulling that information over. All right, so really nothing to do here other than checking it, make sure the information is correct, but we cannot make changes to this screen. All right, then we click on save and continue. Now, I do want to show you, because this is kind of a gotcha for a lot of folks. If something happens, maybe you have to step away from your computer, and the portal times out. All right. So to get back into the form, you can pick up where you left off. Hardest part is knowing where to go back to find that incomplete form. All right. So if for whatever reason you have to get out of the form, like I said, timeout, whatever, to return to the application, up on that blue menu bar, if you click where it says tasks, you'll see something that says create Form 470, the application number. All right. Now, I also want to point out here, the application number, you'll see it starts with 260. All right. The first 2 digits denotes the funding year. Third digit is the third digit of the form type. All right. Just helps you distinguish a 470 from a 471. Right. But it also shows the nickname that you gave it. So just click anywhere, right, on that blue text. It's a hyperlink, and it picks up where you left off. Now, it is kind of confusing. It says create 470. All right. It should say continue. All right. I say this every year because, again, it's something that you previously created but not submitted yet. All right. So the next step after you clicked on that save and continue, it's going to ask, are you the main contact? Yes or no. All right. And when you indicate yes, it's going to, however you logged in, all right, those are the credentials it's going to pull over and populate on the form as the contact. All right. And save and continue. Now, I do want to point out here, as we go through the form, you'll see the option here to discard form. So if you start a 470 and you realize, okay, I really don't need to file this, all right, I'm still under contract, but whatever the reason, I strongly encourage you, if you're not going to complete the form, to discard it, because otherwise the portal will start sending you emails saying, hey, you need to go in and finish this form. And it can get confusing, all right, whenever you receive those emails. So if you're not going to complete it, you have no intentions, just discard the form, get rid of it. Now, on the 470, this is a little different for some of the other forms, like the form 471. If you know when you sit down to fill out this application that you want to apply for both category 1 and category 2, you can put both both types of categories, both types of services on the same application. That's not an issue. All right, that's entirely up to you. But again, since this morning we're only focusing on Cat 1, all right, I'm going to choose category 1. And then it will show you underneath, just to help you remember what's Cat 1 versus Cat 2. And it indicates that category 1, this is data transmission and or internet access, versus category 2 being internal connections, the maintenance, and the management. All right, so I've chosen my category and I click on Save and Continue. Okay, now it's asking, do you have any RFPs, all right, or requests for proposal for service requests? Now, this does not have to, be a formal request for proposal. It could be a simple Word doc or a spreadsheet that just, provides some clarifications as to what it is that you're looking for. And I strongly suggest that you do this, that you provide this information. It'll save you, having to answer vendors' questions. A lot of the vendor questions. They may still come back and, ask something. You can't, totally prevent that, right? But again, it just, gives as much information as possible. All right. So again, it's just asking, are you going to have an RFP document or not? So if you indicate yes, then we just click on upload, right? Go out, grab the document. Now, I do want to point out, because you don't get this information until you've made the mistake. The file name cannot have any characters in it. I like to put, dashes or whatever. It catches me every time. All right. So again, it'll give you an error message if the file name, does have a character in it. All right. So again, if you have multiple documents, get those uploaded. All right. If not, obviously answer no, and you're good. Save and continue. All right, here's just a quick example of what I'm referring to. All right, so if you're looking at, say, point-to-point circuits down to your branches, all right, so what I would suggest, just detail. I'm looking for, a point-to-point circuit, for this library branch. Here's their address, and it's a point-to-point connection to connect back to. All right, and then you can put in that, that demarc location. Again, just kind of simplifies it there. If you could also add a column there if you wanted. If you're looking for specific bandwidth, a minimum bandwidth amount for each of those sites, maybe, most of the sites you're okay with, let's say 500 meg, and another site, maybe you want a gig as a minimum. All right, you can add that information as well. Now, if you are applying for the hotspot for the bookmobile or a kiosk, even though, the cost is minimal, it does take a little work to apply for these. One of the reasons is that you have to upload an RFP document. Again, it can be something as simple, a Word document, just detailing. All right. So again, this is one that I typically use. So I put in the build entity number, okay, the address, contact information, and then I just explain, for the service, we're seeking 2 wireless units with data for the library bookmobile and kiosk. It's something as simple as that. All right, but the system's going to look when you go to ask for the service, when you go to add it to the form, did you upload an RFP document? All right, because any document that we upload, it's referred to as an RFP. All right, and if you have not uploaded the document, it's a hard stop. The system won't let you add that service. all right, without that document uploaded. So it is required. All right, so after we've added our, any RFP documents we might have, then it's going to come back and say, okay, I see this RFP document. Is this applicable for, these category 1 requests? Just check the box to the left, all right, of the file name. And I know this may be, kind of silly, but if you answered no, to the previous question about having an RFP document, you're not going to see the screen. I've gotten panic questions when the screen didn't show up for some folks. All right, so again, you won't see it if you did not upload a document. All right, so this is really the meat of the 470. Now, keep in mind the 470, I refer to it as a wish list, right? So just because you add a service, something on a 470 does not mean that you have to move forward, and actually purchase or contract for the service. All right, the whole point of this is to get pricing. All right, but we start adding the services, because remember, if a service is not listed on the 470, you cannot move forward to get it funded on the 471. All right, if it's something requiring, that bidding. All right, so we start by clicking on Add New Service, Service Request. And then, once you finish adding the services, that's when I typically go back and then explain, what it is you're looking for in the narrative. All right, so I'll click on Add New Service Request. Now I'm going to walk through some of the options here just to help you understand, what's what. And I'll point out the ones that, the libraries typically do not use. All right. Because again, sometimes the language can be a little confusing. All right. So again, is this something that you should look closely at or not? All right. So when we first click, all right, it's going to give us the option whether or not you seek bids for internet access and or data transmission service. All right, so that's the very first option. All right, and then we just start drilling down. All right, kind of like process of elimination. All right, so when I say we seek bids for internet access and data transmission service, it's like, okay, so what exactly are you looking for? This very first option is indicating that you're looking for both the bandwidth and internet bundled together. All right, so, since, our libraries where Oakland provides what I refer to as a head-in circuit, say to your main library or wherever the DMARC is, Oakland provides both that circuit as well as the internet access, right, for all the library sites. All right, so, and then you contract for the point-to-point circuits down to your branches. All right, well, maybe you have a remote site where you can't, it's not really, feasible to bring a circuit back to, say, your main library. All right, so you're going to basically contract, for internet and the bandwidth from an ISP. All right, so that's that first option there. Second option, seek bids for internet access without data transmission. All right, or bids for data transmission service only. And then we also see the option, I seek to build my own network, and I'll explain what some of those are. Now, this very last one I said highlighted in red, or I'm not highlighted, sorry, covered up in red. This is for those patron hotspots. Again, it's still listed on the form, all right, but it is not, if you put it on the form, it's not going to get funded. Just know that up front. All right, so this is what it looks like if you're asking for that bundled internet access and transport. All right, so like I said, just kind of you keep drilling down. So when I choose that first option, then it comes back and says, okay, so, what are you looking for? That bundled service with internet and transport? Or are you looking for a data plan, basically, the hotspot for the bookmobile, the kiosk? All right, so in this case, if I said, yep, I really do want that bundled internet and bandwidth for my remote branch, all right, I'll go ahead and choose that top radio button there. All right, then we basically explain, so what's the quantity? All right, so the quantity is how many circuits, all right, how many circuits are you looking for? So maybe I need, to serve 2 of my remote library branches. All right, so I indicated 2 there. All right, then below that, it's what's the minimum and maximum capacity. I've always recommended putting in a range. What's either what do you have currently, or if you know that the current amount of bandwidth is not adequate, all right, you can take it a step up, right? But always put in a minimum and then, what's the max that you would like to go up to? Because sometimes, this may be a 3-year or 5-year contract, right, that you're going to enter into. Does that contract, some contracts will allow you to do a bandwidth upgrade during that multi-year term, right? But the E-rate rule is, does the 470 support it? So if you said, I want the minimum to be 500 and the max to be 500, all right, 500 meg, if the contract allows for a bandwidth upgrade, you've basically, cut off that possibility, because again, you didn't put in, that bandwidth growth, right? That maximum. I hope that makes sense. All right, and then to the right here, it says, okay, you've indicated the number, what's the quantity? Well, how many entities will this serve? Well, it's the 2 circuits that serve my 2 remote branches. All right, so I'll indicate the number 2 here. Now, it does ask this yes, no question. Are you seeking installation, activation, and initial configuration, or the initial configuration? Almost always, I'll indicate yes there, because sometimes you don't know, is there going to be some installation cost or configuration cost? E-rate will cover that cost. All right. So, if you're not sure, just answer yes. All right. Just make sure that you're covered. Now, it will automatically have a check mark next to the RFP document that you uploaded. All right. Now, let's say this was an RFP just for the hotspot for the bookmobile. All right. That maybe instead of uploading, an RFP document for this internet, bandwidth, instead of uploading an RFP, I'm just going to explain it in the narrative. Okay. Which is an option. All right. So if this RFP document does not apply to the service that you're looking for, just come down and remove that check mark. All right. But again, it's automatically going to be checked for you. You have to remove the check mark if it does not apply. All right. And then we're going to click on Save Request. All right. Let me know if you have questions on that. It's pretty, like I said, it's pretty straightforward. All right. Now, this was a button that was added. I want to point out here where it says Save and Create Another Request. All right. When this has been around now for several years. When it first came out, I thought, well, that's really interesting. That's helpful. Well, not so much. All right. Because if you click on Save and Create Another Request, it just repeats everything that you just provided, and why you would have, 2 of the exact same requests on the same 470. For most of our applicants, it really doesn't apply. All right. So not sure why it's used. All right. So again, just kind of ignore that button. All right, so we'll click on Save Request. All right, let me show you, if we choose that internet and bandwidth option. I mentioned that the second option is for the data plans. All right, but again, this is for bookmobile, a kiosk, not for patron use. All right, I'll choose that radio button there. Now, when I choose that, you get this red language. All right, it's not an error message per se. All right, it's just letting you know, that this has very limited, eligibility. Basically showing that this is the most cost-effective way of getting internet to that bookmobile. All right. So again, don't panic when you see the red text. It's just giving you that heads up there. Now, I do want to point out at the very bottom, if you did not upload an RFP document, at least one document, all right, you will get this error message that we see at the bottom. All right. And you would have to cancel, go back a couple of screens, upload the RFP document. All right. And then come back and complete this step. All right. But it will give you an error message, like I said, if you didn't upload. All right. Now here we just indicate, so what's the quantity? So how many hotspots are you looking for? Well, maybe you need one for the bookmobile and one for that kiosk. All right. So here I'll indicate 2, and I apologize, there's some ringing or something in the background. All right. So I'll indicate what's the quantity. So I'll say for 2. How many entities serve? 2. All right. My bookmobile and my kiosk. All right. Same thing here. We're going to put in the minimum and maximum capacity. All right. Now with the hotspot, that's kind of confusing sometimes. I'll typically put in like 1 gig for the minimum, 5 gigs for the maximum. We know that a hotspot's not going to give you 5 gigs of bandwidth. All right, but it's allowed. Now, same thing here with the installation configuration. Go ahead and answer yes there. All right, so if there is some setup fee, all right, you want E-rate to cover that. All right, so again, that's pretty straightforward, asking for those hotspots. Right. Now, again, like I said, I'm just trying to explain to you what some of these options are, just so you can, make sure you can go through and pick out the correct ones. This option here for internet access only, very rarely do I see libraries asking for this. This is if the internet is billed separately. Well, Oakland provides, internet for the majority of our libraries. And if it's a remote site where, you can't get back to your main library, like I explained earlier, all right, you could ask for, that bundled service. Very rarely will a library ask for just internet only. Again, just to explain with that option there. Okay, so bandwidth only. This is the one that most of our library systems request. All right, so again, these are those point-to-point circuits, all right, to connect your branch libraries back to your main or wherever that DMARC, wherever that Oakland circuit connects into. All right, so like I said, this is the one that you're going to use most often. So we start with choosing that initial internet access and bandwidth. Then we come down to that third option. I seek bids to purchase data transmission service only. Now, when you choose that option, all right, then you're going to see it repeated. All right, just click on it a second time. You will get this, again, this red text. It's not an error message. It's just letting you know that most applicants, throughout, the United States applying for E-rate, that this is not a common selection. All right. But again, it's not an error message. It's not preventing you from choosing the service, right, and completing the form. Just a heads up. All right, so again, what's the quantity? Well, if you have, let's say you have 5 branches and you're looking for the circuits going down to those 5 sites, we would put in, say, a quantity of 5. Number of entities served, well, it's my 5 branch locations. Same thing here, what's the minimum and maximum capacity? So go with whatever's that lowest, bandwidth amount, and then what's the max that you might want to increase, say over a 3-year, 5-year period of time. All right, and again, answer yes for the installation, activation, and configuration, just to be on the safe side. Like I said, though, this is the one that most of our libraries will fill out. Now, you will see some options here for something that says that that basically you want to seek bids for data transmission only for dark fiber. This is where someone else owns the fiber, but you're responsible for lighting it. Again, just to make you aware that it's out there, but this is not something that most of our libraries apply for. All right, but it may be something, say your local municipality is maybe offering that fiber as they're, installing it around town, that you may have an option, to apply for that. Now, if you are asking for dark fiber, there are a lot of rules around it. This does require a formal RFP. All right, so again, if this is something where you're thinking about, you might want to look into this, let me know. I have some documents I can share with you. Like I said, but very rarely have I seen libraries apply for this. All right, same thing here, supervision. I've seen, school districts using this. Libraries, I have not seen a single library, I think, apply for this. This is where if you're laying the fiber to connect, say, 2 of your library sites, and you're going to own the fiber. These are quite costly, paying for the installation, to lay the fiber. Just so you understand, this is what they're asking for here. Now, if you do have, some type of fiber where there's maintenance operation of that, you are allowed to ask for that as well. All right. But again, this is around that if you are going to utilize, or maybe you already have utilized that dark fiber, all right, that you can ask for if there's a separate charge for the maintenance and operation of the fiber. Maybe the, the municipality is not charging you to use their fiber. They're just charging you, to pay for the maintenance of that. Like I said, just want to make you aware what some of these options are. All right, so once you're done adding those services, all right, so you go through, you add the first service. If you need to go back and add a second one, just click on the blue, add a new service request. just keep adding them. With category 1, because there aren't that many options under category 1, right? You typically don't have many services on the form itself. All right, so here we're going to see, here's that internet access and data transmission service, all right, for just those data lines, all right, let's say for 2 of our branches. And then we also ask for the hotspot for the bookmobile. All right, now if you're done adding the service, you'll just scroll down just a little, all right, and then you're going to see the narrative. So here, just explain what it is that you're looking for. Now, if you did upload an RFP document, I still give some explanation, and basically inform the vendors, for the sites, for the addresses, go to the RFP document. All right, put it kind of like in their face that, you need to drill down to that attached form, or that attached RFP to get that additional information. All right, so I just explained we're seeking point-to-point circuits, right, for, let's say in this case, 3 library branches, that we prefer least lit fiber. We're allowed to say that, that's our preference. The attached RFP provides a list of sites, basically the addresses, the bandwidth needs. Again, just give an explanation there. All right, I also stated we're seeking cellular data plans or hotspots to provide internet access to the library outreach van, right, to the bookmobile, the kiosk, right, whatever the situation. All right, now at the top here, it says narrative, if you'd like to provide further detail for the services or equipment sought. All right, but also we need disqualification factors. There's 2 different places where we can put disqualification factors. So the E-rate rule is if there's something that's going to disqualify a vendor, they need to know that up front, right? We have to state it on the form, either on the form or it could be in that RFP document. All right, so here are the ones that we typically that I typically recommend. When you file a 470, again, it's the bidding form. It goes out. This is a national program. So vendors all over the country, right, will see your posted 470. So it's typical, to get bids, from all over the place. And there are some vendors that as soon as, usually within like a day or so that you submit a 470, you start getting these automated documents, all right, where it's, this robotic type, response. So USAC has recommended that we put on the 470, that you're not going to consider these spam or robotic, type bids. All right. So something is simple here. I said, spam and or robotic responses will not be considered valid bid responses and will be disqualified from consideration. All right. So again, USAC recommends putting it out there so vendors know up front. Now, the other thing here, I mentioned that we have to wait that minimum of 28 days before that we start evaluating bids. USAC has also said, that you need to put a deadline. What's the deadline, for that bid submission? Well, it's always been the 29th day. On the 29th day, you can start evaluating bids, but USAC says we need to state that. All right. I mean, you can give more than 28 days. You can say, okay, we think we're going to need 45 days. You're allowed to give more time, but again, put that deadline there. So here I said the deadline for vendor proposals is 9 a.m. Eastern, 29 days from the date of the 470 posted. We reserve the right to reject late submitted proposals. Now, this language, we reserve the right to reject, it's basically saying, okay, well, what if, I get a quote on the 30th day and I decide it's a really good quote and I want to consider it. This language saying we reserve the right, that allows you to say, okay, I'm going to give more time. So we are allowed to do that. Even if we said, okay, here's, we're going to start evaluating bids on the 29th day, you could go ahead and say, yep, we'll go ahead and, we'll accept, through the 30th day, the 40th day. As long as any vendor that sends you a bid during that extended time, you evaluate all of those bids. All right. So again, that is considered fair and open. All right. Again, I hope that made sense. Let me know if you have any questions there. Oh, I apologize. This additional question here, this installation payment plan, this is if you're looking at one of those fiber build outs like the dark fiber or the self-provision. because sometimes that installation cost can be pretty costly, pretty high, right? And so with E-rate, you have to show that you paid your non-discount portion, right, during the funding year. Well, that non-discount portion, I've seen some of these build outs, $100,000. And if you're at a 60% discount rate, that means you have to, basically be prepared to pay that $40,000. So this yes, no question here for most of us, the answer is going to be no. But if you indicate yes, you're simply letting the service provider know that you're looking for some type of payment plan with that vendor. All right. So again, most of us, we just answer no there. But just so you understand what they're asking for. All right, so once we click on save and continue, once we have all the information in the narrative, then it's going to ask us, is there a secondary contact, a technical contact that you would like to add to the form? All right, so, for most vendors, they're going to look at, who is listed on that very first part of the form, right? That contact, right? Well, if you have a technical, person that you would like to be able to field those technical type questions, we are allowed to add that secondary contact. Now, it does give us the option here where the main contact has to have a portal account. The technical contact does not. All right, so they're not required to have an Epic account. All right, so is there a person? Yes or no? The answer no. Continue. If you do answer yes, it's going to ask, do you want to search the Epic system for this user? All right, so do they have a portal account? All right, or do you choose to enter the details manually? All right, so typically it's, we'll add them manually, and then here are all the required fields. All right, and then save and continue. And my comment here, don't add someone who's affiliated with your service provider. In some cases, you may contract with, say, an IT company who provides, E-rated services to you. They cannot also be your contact on an E-rate bidding form. All right. So once you've added, you've provided the information, is there a technical contact or not? The next screen that we see, are there any state or local procurement requirements? Yes or no? I typically indicate yes and provide the same information that I put in the narrative, things like, spam or robotic, bids won't be considered. Here's the deadline. I also add, all questions and quotes must be, emailed to. I typically suggest putting, the email address saying, send the quote, send the bids to this individual at this email address. Sometimes I'll add the language saying, phone calls, not an option. You want to keep in mind that if a service provider calls you to say, hey, we'd like to talk about that 470 you posted, you have to be very, very careful there because you're not allowed to give one vendor information you don't share with all the vendors. And you risk, during that conversation on the phone, providing maybe, too much information. All right. So again, I suggest having everything sent, via email. You could also put things like, if you prefer a local vendor or previous experience. All right. So once we have that information, then basically the last step is to review it and submit it. Now, I do want to point out of my resource library, I do have a document out there that has some, some procurement, requirements that you might want to put on that 470, some additional things, vendor must have a SPIN, that's the service provider identification number. You have to have a SPIN at the time of awarding the contract. Because if they don't have a SPIN when you go to file the 471, we use that identification number to say, well, here's the company that we've chosen. And if they don't have a SPIN at the point you're filing the 471, then we run into issues. All right. Is this, do you prefer an in-state or local vendor? Previous experience preferred? Something else I really strongly recommend, with E-rate, there's one of two ways to receive the funding. Either you pay the invoices in full, and then it falls on you as the E-rate applicant to file the bear form for reimbursement. The other option is to communicate with the service provider you want discounted bills. So then they only bill you for the portion E-rate's not covering. Now, if you're very, very adamant, you want to get discounted billing, put that on, you definitely want to put that on the 470. all right, to be able to say that, vendors have to state in writing that they are willing to give the discounted bill. All right, because we've had some vendors say, oh yeah, well, I'll do that. And then after the fact, not happen. All right, so again, you could do that. And then any vendor who refuses to put that in writing, you can disqualify. Yes, and Christine, thank you for that comment there. Yeah, it really helps when you start, comparing some of these quotes, some of these bids. All right, again, let me know if you have questions there. All right, so once we click on review, it does basically back us out of the Form 470, and you'll get a message there saying that when it's ready, it'll be available for certification. And the way it's available, where you find it, you have to go back up to that blue menu bar and click on tasks. All right, and sometimes, this can take 2 or 3 minutes. It depends on how busy the system is. All right, so, but come up, click on task, and then you'll see an option that looks very similar when we clicked on, create, all right, to continue the form, only this time it's going to say certify Form 470, okay, with that nickname. So we'll click on the blue text there to certify. Now, when we do that, you're going to see a hyperlink here. It says download document link. It's going to pull up a draft version of that 470. All right, so it's going to show the contact information, how many entities are, reflected on this form, the service type, the quantity, all that information, whatever you put in the narrative, the state local procurement, check it over. All right, make sure, are all the quantities correct? Is all the information correct? All right. If you realize that you did make a mistake, you can click on the back button. You go back one screen at a time until you get to the section that you need to make a correction or, an addition. If everything looks good, all right, we just click the box right below there saying that, yes, I certify to the best of my ability. This is correct. All right. And then the next step is completing the certification. Now, you'll see 2 options here. If you are what we call a full rights user. Full right users in Epic means that you have the ability to fill out the form and certify them. If you are a partial right user, it means that you can fill out all the fields, but you cannot complete the certification at the end. All right. So if you are a partial right user, you will only see the option send for certification. When you click on that, it will create a task for any other full right users, like the account administrator in Epic. All right. But very important, if you click on that send for certification, go to that individual, let them know you need to go into the portal and complete this step, right? Because the form's not filed until they go in and complete that certification piece. So really important. I've seen some folks miss the deadline, right? Because they clicked on send for certification and the individual, maybe the email letting them know this was out there went into their spam folder. All right. So again, go tap them on the shoulder and say, be sure to get this done. All right. Here we're full right. So I'll click on continue to certification. Do you wish to proceed? Yes. Okay. Now, certifications, you'll see a series listed here, applicant certification and then other certifications. Read through them, make sure you're comfortable making the certification. If you read through and think, well, I'm really not comfortable, you can click on back if there's somebody else in the portal that can go in and do the certification. All right, but all the boxes have to be clicked there. So once you're done clicking those, we come down to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We click on certify. You'll get a pop-up saying, okay, here's the penalty for false statements, right? Click on yes. Yes, we want to proceed. Okay, so we've just submitted the 470. Now, if you need to go back, in fact, I strongly recommend a couple of things here. Shortly after that you submit the form, all right, when we're at the landing page, let me jump over here, see if I can show you that. When we're at the landing page, sorry, wrong screen. This is the landing page. When we scroll all the way down to the bottom, here's a section that says SEC forms and post commitment request. All right, the default is the 470 because that's the first form in the process. We click on the pull down to choose the funding year. So I'll choose 2026. All right, and then it's going to show us the nickname, right, of any 470s that have been filed to date right, for the 2026 funding year. All right, now the name is in blue, it's a hyperlink, but be sure, read across and make sure that the status is listed as certified. And again, sometimes this can take several minutes for it to change from incomplete to certified. The reason I'm stressing that you check that is we've had some cases where, maybe the portal hiccups and the status never changes. It's just sitting out there as incomplete. All right. So again, just make sure that it does, that it does flip over, right, from incomplete to certified. All right. And here, I'll go ahead and just show you here. So if I click on, I just filed my Cat 1. When I click on category 1 there, that Cat 1 form, all right, this is where really important that you go back and you check. All right, verify what is that 29th date. We call that the allowable contract date. So this is the earliest date that you could start evaluating bids and choose a vendor. All right, sign off on on the contract. So look where it says allowable contract date, and this is that 29th day. And remember that when you file a 470, it's based on calendar days. Does not matter the time of day that you submit, whether it's in the AM or PM, that's day 1, all right? 29th day, again, that's the earliest day. Let me come back here. All right, so like I said, just make sure that the status changes, all right, and verify that date. All right, and then very important, communicate with all the powers to be that, again, this is the earliest date that we can choose a vendor, because we've had, cases where, maybe on the 27th day, someone lost count, they went ahead and signed a contract. Well, then you've got a problem, all right, because you've not met that 28-day waiting period. Okay, so also when you're there looking at the form, scroll down, all right, it's going to show all that information again, right, that we listed on that form. Now, there's also an option here where it says view RFP documents. Now, with that, because this is a question I get often from vendors, where they'll go out and they'll look for the 470, and they'll see in the narrative, it says, go out and look at this RFP document for addresses and, the detail, all right, but they'll indicate, well, I can't find it, all right? So if we scroll down, all right, and I come here, you'll notice there's nothing here that says, well, here's that RFP document. I have to come here and click on view RFP document, and then it's going to show up here as a hyperlink. All right, but the vendor has to click where it says view RFP document for it to populate down below. Like I said, I get lots of questions from vendors on that, where to find that. All right, now I mentioned that, the couple of things we can do to edit the form. So to find those menu options, when we're looking at the form itself, you'll notice that there's some menu options, one's listed as related actions. So when I click there, we see these options. So, we can do something as, simple as editing the nickname. Maybe you just said this is for FY 2026 and the library name, but you didn't distinguish, is this Cat 1 or Cat 2? All right, you can come back, you can edit the name. Maybe you realized you made a typo, okay? We can go back and edit, not an issue at all. Changing the main contact or the technical contact, again, that's not changing any of the service information. So those changes you can make, without risking, your 28-day waiting period. All right, but here's the option if we want to add an RFP document. All right, so like I said, if you go in and you add an RFP document, or maybe you already added one but realized you made a mistake, and so you're adding a new document, right, to correct the information. All right, that's where once you upload it, it's going to ask, is this changing the service, yes or no? All right, and then the very last option is canceling the 470. All right, so again, just making you aware that those options are available. Now, once you've waited that minimum of 28 days, right? So whether you're doing this on the 29th day, the 30th, whatever, very important that you construct a bid evaluation if you receive 2 bids or more. If you only receive the 1 bid, maybe it's your local, your local telco, that's, has been providing your bandwidth to your branches, and maybe they're the only bid that you receive. All right, E-rate does not require that you have a certain number, a minimum number of bids. So if you're happy with that service, you can just put something in writing, maybe email the service provider saying, yes, we're going to continue the service, for another year, something to memorialize that decision. All right. But you're not going to do a bid evaluation if you really only received the one bid. All right. But two or more, make sure you do this, because this is something in an audit situation. Auditors will come back and ask for this document. Okay, that's pretty typical. All right, so price has to be the highest weighted factor, all right, meaning it has to have the highest number of points. All right, but we also said on our form, maybe we said, prior experience preferred. Maybe it was something as far as compatibility. And Christine, your comment, yeah, make darn sure that you do put something in writing, all right, even if it's only one bid, and keep that documentation for 10 years. Again, that is something that USAC will come back and say, okay, you indicated you only have one bid, prove it. And your proof is that memorialization. You're putting something in writing that as of this date, we just received this one bid. All right. Something like the flexible invoicing, whether it's discounted bills or not. Like I said, if you put that on, that was your preference to get discounted bills there. All right. And again, the FCC or USAC does not dictate the point spread, right? As long as you can show that price has the highest number of points. Now, you want to be careful, because I've seen some applicants do this where they put price at like 50 points and then the next option, like 49 points. That's not reasonable, right? You need to have enough of a spread there. All right, but just be sure to construct this. All right, names of the vendors, because you're justifying why you chose one vendor over another. Now, something else to look at here, E-rate does not require that you go with the cheapest bid, as long as you can justify why you went with someone else where maybe the cost was a little more. So we can see that vendor 2 received the lion's share, the 50 points for price, right? But you have no experience with them. All right, maybe they're not local or in state. All right, so they get the 0 points there, where the vendor 3, again, maybe their cost was a little more, so they only received 40 points for the price. All right, but you can show that they won the bid overall because they met the other criteria. So again, set this up, keep it in your files for the 10 years. Now, another document, I have a lot of things out there on the resource library. I do have a bid evaluation letter that you're, more than welcome to go out and grab. It's in a Word format, so you can go in and, tweak it however necessary. So you can change the point values if there are additional, factors you want to list. All right, again, it's out there for you to use. You can add additional columns if you receive more than 3 bids. I also added this statement, right, where you can plug in the name of the winning vendor, all right, the type service, and then sign and date the evaluation. Again, that's also very important. You want to show that, this is when the evaluation was actually done. So this is also very helpful if you do the evaluation. Let's say you do this on the 30th day. So you've already done your bid evaluation, and then you have another vendor reach out and want to bid on that 470. This is your evidence that, you've already completed this step. All right, so again, that's out of the resource library. I have both a Cat 1 and a Cat 2 version. That is the 470 in a nutshell. I say that every year. All right, the 470 for the category 1 is, especially for the type services our libraries utilize, probably the easiest of most of the forms. So let me know if you have any questions.
That's a lot of great information, Lori, as always. And I wanted to chime in and apologize in my haste to get the handouts up on the event sites on the state library calendar. I accidentally put the Category 2 handout on today's. So if you go back to the calendar, that will be there, but it's on Lori's website. You can email me. We'll get you the handouts if you don't have them handy.
Yeah.
And I always go back and refer to the handouts as I'm going through the process. It's just extremely helpful as a step-by-step reminder of, oh, what did Lori say to do here or not to do?
To do.
Both are
It's
equally important.
exactly. It's as important to know what not to do as it is what to do, how to fill this darn thing out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
But if you do have questions, and I absolutely recommend signing up for Lori's emails as well as the Oakland list, Oakland Tech, whichever you're on. Oakland updates. If you want minimal communication from Oakland, just sign up for the Oakland updates. But Lori's email, Lori's listserv is extremely valuable if you're doing E-rates. So please make sure you sign up for that. Never hurts to hear things a couple times in a couple different ways.
Exactly. And if you are, considering applying for category 2, because remember, just because you put some category 2 items on the 470, it's not, locking you in, to move forward and purchase. It's just to get the pricing. If you're considering, maybe you're currently not SEPA compliant, but you're considering becoming compliant, you do not have to be compliant, at the point that you're filing the 470. So no harm in, getting that filed. But with category 2, especially internal connections, that's the equipment. So the router, switches, access points, structured cabling, a UPS, basic firewall. That form is more detailed, all right, because there's lots of pieces and parts, right, to put on the application. So the 470 for the Cat 2, especially internal connections, it is more detailed. It's not hard. You just have to, make sure that you're grabbing those pieces and parts. All right. So it's my plug. If you're planning on applying for category 2, please plan on attending the 470 training for that.
And if you haven't seen, that training is Thursday.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can always sign up and get the recordings. If you sign up you get the recordings before anybody else.
Yay.
That's the bonus. You're a quiet group this morning.
It is quiet. Kind of like you and I this morning, Christine.
Right, right.
After a regular 3-day weekend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a Tuesday that feels like a Monday. Even if you had staff development day, I know a lot of libraries had staff development day yesterday. It's still kind of getting back in the saddle like it is a Monday. All right.
If there's no questions, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.